Tuesday, February 16th, 2021, 6:37 p.m. I will call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. Sorry for the late start. We had a little bit of a technical hiccup with the Zoom schedule getting in. Okay, so I think I'll just get right into our agenda. We have a number of good-sized topics to cover. The first topic that we're going to be discussing tonight are dispatch operations discussions. So some years ago, the town looked into joining the Middleton Regional Dispatch Center. At the time, it was being run by the Sheriff's Department over there. And it was a new facility and a new administration running it. And after a considerable amount of research into the topic, ferreting out the different aspects of the town was going to have to deal with in order to go to it, and the financial ins and outs, the town decided to not move forward with that at the time, based in part on a lack of surety about a fledgling system and concerns about how well it might work out for us. Since then, the state has taken over that facility. There have been a number of changes to it. The financial incentives have changed for the town from the state, and it was considered that it would be worthwhile for the town to look at the regional dispatch question again and see whether or not it made sense to revisit it. So we asked the police chief and the fire chief and Greg to go through and put together a more detailed set of things that we would need to do in order to move to the regional facility. And we're going to hear from the police chief and fire chief and Greg on that report today. We're not going to be making any decision about moving to this facility. Before we do that, we'll do a considerable amount of additional research, and there would be public forums before we undertook such a change. So that's the teeing up of the topic for tonight. So Greg, if you want to take it away at this point.
Sure, thank you. So as you say, this topic has been sort of on the table off and on for quite a few years. And during the time, there have been a number of changes to the in-house operations. So a number of years ago, we would have, in essence, two dispatch facilities, police and fire. The calls typically would come into police, and they used to be automatically, for a fire call, transferred to the fire station, where a firefighter would take over the call and dispatch from the fire station. A number of years ago, we were able to merge those two functions and have all of the dispatching take place out of the police department. And that was a step in the right direction in terms of freeing up firefighters so that they can be on scene rather than doing the dispatch function. However, we still have a number of challenges with our current operations, particularly when you compare it to the level of service that other places have, including the regional center that is now being operated by the state. So there are a number of deficiencies that we have with our current operations, and these need correcting, either through efforts to bolster our in-house operations or the possibility of going to a regional center. Deficiencies are not because of the staff. We have a very good staff. They do a very good job, but we have limited staff. So right now we have an operation where we have one dispatcher on each shift. We have 3 full-time dispatchers. They each take an 8-hour shift, Monday through Friday. And then on weekends, the 6 shifts, the 6 8-hour shifts, typically are covered by part-time dispatchers, reserve officers, or sometimes regular patrol officers working an overtime shift and doing dispatching. So again, those folks do an excellent job with what they do and are able to handle calls. The challenge that we see is in the equipment that we have. And also, if we have a large fire incident, it really requires someone handling that fire call 100% and not being required to handle other calls simultaneously. So we do have a protocol where we try to bring somebody in when there's that large incident in order to have 2 dispatchers, one being dedicated to the fire incident and the other handling any other calls that are coming. Obviously, that it isn't instantaneous in terms of having that second person appear. So there's a delay there that is some cause for concern on the fire side. The other deficiencies that we have, as I mentioned, some of our software in particular, we're working off of an old dispatch tracking and recording system. And if we are to remain in-house, that would need an upgrade. It's an expensive purchase. It's about $150,000 for the purchase of the software, and then it has an annual operating cost as well. We also could do better in our training in terms of formalizing some of the fireside training aspects of dispatching. It's something that has been talked about and some manuals put together, but we really haven't gone to the extent of providing the comprehensive training that our dispatchers really should have if they're to be fully versed in fireside operations. And obviously all of these have a cost associated with them. As I mentioned, the software can be expensive to do. So the struggles we have are some staffing challenges, even with keeping one on. We have struggled recently with the part-time people and having a sufficient number of reserve or part-time dispatchers to fill in. So getting weekend coverage can be a challenge. We have the antiquated software that needs updating. We need to do a better job with training. And then, of course, the financial piece. So there are two ways to go. We can continue to invest in our in-house system to improve upon the service that we're providing in-house, or alternatively, we could look towards moving to the regional center that is being operated in Middleton. So at a high level review in terms of sort of pros and cons, keeping it in-house, you certainly maintain the maximum amount of control. That is our operation and our people, and we can set the policies and protocols that are followed. Also having it in-house means that the dispatchers also monitor and can service the lobby so that we have 24/7 coverage of the police lobby for when it is needed. It doesn't see a lot of traffic, on a typical day, it's 1 or 2 people that are coming into the lobby. So it's not a heavy amount of traffic to service. But when someone wants to access the police and the police station, obviously it's nice to have that available for people. And I think a fourth advantage of being in-house is certainly strong dispatcher staff and strong dispatcher resident relationships. So you can build up those relationships more readily if you're running the dispatch operations from in-house. On the regional side, in terms of sort of the high level advantages, the there are multiple dispatchers always on duty. So when there is a large incident in town, you can be assured that there would be a dedicated dispatcher to that large incident, and there would be other dispatchers able to take the other calls. So that is available 24/7 at the regional center. The training is sort of state of the art and is continuing for those dispatchers. We could try to replicate that in-house, certainly. We are not there yet, but it is something that the regional center has put into place. Another advantage from the regional centers, it's a turnkey operation. We don't have to dedicate management supervision time to it. On the downside, we don't have total control over it. So we would just serve on an advisory board and provide input, but we would not be making the ultimate decisions of how operations are at the regional center. The regional center provides all the equipment that is needed, and they provide the service and the equipment currently at no charge to participating municipalities. A downside there is that we don't have a guarantee that would remain into the future. So it's attractive now financially, but there's certainly things could change. You don't know what funding needs may come up and what requirements that they may require participating municipalities to contribute in the future. So cons on either side. So we do have a higher operating cost and capital expenses if we keep it in-house, though the bottom line savings would depend on how we make up for some lobby coverage at the police station. So depending on how we structure that will depend on the ultimate amount of savings that we might see. Again, on the in-house side, we do have some staffing and training challenges. Not that they're insurmountable, but they do exist. And again, that staffing for large incidents tends to be a challenge in particular. Some of the cons on the regional center, like I mentioned, that advisory board only, so no direct local control. We lose that lobby function that we currently have with our current dispatchers. And we lose some personalization. We lose that strong dispatcher staff and dispatcher resident relationships that have grown over time with our good staff that we currently have. So just quickly on sort of the big picture numbers. So currently our operating cost for the dispatch center in-house is a little bit under $400,000. We do receive additional grant monies. We receive 911 grant funding to the tune of about $70,000. And if we add in what is the anticipated annual cost for the new software, about $15,000. So our net town expenses projected for the in-house operation is in the neighborhood of $335,000. Again, that's net after subtracting out what the grant is able to purchase or pay for. On the regional side, that 335 is at this point would be compared to a zero cost. So there's that difference. However, with the regional model, we would need to figure out how we want to handle the police lobby situation. And depending on how we address that, your costs are in the range of $50,000 to $200,000. Now that's a big range. And it really is because of different choices in how you might staff the lobby, provide that service to walk-in traffic. Obviously, the high end is more intensive. It assumes basically 16-hour-a-day coverage, 7 days a week, not providing coverage during the midnight shift in the lobby. but it does, that 200,000 figure assumes, as I say, 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week. On the lower end, it assumes that we would do some shuffling of some assignment for staff and hiring some part-time people to help on weekends and to provide some additional administrative services on the fire side to free up some time on the police side for that lobby coverage during the day. So again, choices there, depending on what we do, will depend on the amount we pay. So obviously on the in-house model, this is where we have a zero because it's basically covered by the cost of the dispatchers being there already. So then we get down to the capital needs. On the in-house version, we're looking at a capital expense, over, well, the immediate capital expense is for the CAD dispatch for both fire and police. It's about $190,000 for both systems, $150,000 for police and about a $40,000 cost for fire. And then over time, you have the need to replace radios, portable radios, the mobile units in the vehicles over time. So that's, on a 5 to 8 year time horizon, capital expenses that are in the $60,000 range. So that $250,000 worth of capital compares to the regional center side, we would be spending in the range of $18,000 to create or update the lobby situation that we currently have in order to have direct audio and video connection from the lobby to the regional dispatch center and creating a safe lobby that someone could lock themselves in basically in an emergency situation. So there's a cost there. So bottom line, if you compare the two, the net savings going to regional center would be, again, a range, depending on what we do about the lobby staffing, a range of roughly $135,000, $136,000 of savings to a higher end of $290,000 a year in savings. That's the annual operating cost, those operating savings, I should say. And then on the capital side, you're looking at it, over a multi-year period of savings in the $230,000 range, if by going regional versus in-house. Now, this all assumes that the current offer of paying for all equipment and paying for the annual expenses, all by the state, continues. So obviously, that's a large assumption going in. So that provides an overview of our current operations and cost and a comparison of what it might look like versus going to the regional center. Both chiefs are with us. They can fill in more of the details for you, given the overview I just provided. So I'm happy for them to chime in and provide you with those details and, of course, answer questions that you have.
I think maybe what we'll do is go around the board and see if we have questions now, and then see if we want to get some additional fill-in or comments from both chiefs. Jeff, you had a question?
I do. The training grant for training the dispatchers for police and fire, is there a sunset date on that grant?
So, Todd, do you want to speak to that? I believe that's an annual 911 grant.
It's an annual grant that we receive every single year and that we apply for.
But is there a limit to the number of years that you can receive the grant?
No, as long as we have a PSAP, we can receive the grant.
Okay,
So I believe we've been receiving that grant for well, an awful long time, and certainly predates me, but we've had that every year. So we've been receiving that for how many years, Todd? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know. It's well, at least 15 or 20 anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems pretty stable.
At about the same number, Greg or Todd?
No, it increased when we started to take our own wireless calls. I think that was in 2016 or 2017.
So it is somewhat volume dependent, is my understanding.
Correct.
Is this a $70,000 grant or is this another grant?
That's the 70,000 that I referenced.
Okay. Is that specifically for training or?
Training and equipment. So it's a support and incentive grant for training and equipment, and then we have the other for salaries. So it's all mixed into one what we call a law enforcement grant.
Todd, may I ask a question, Eli, a question of Todd?
Sure.
Yep, definitely.
Does the police department's accreditation have any impact on this grant?
No, this is all state 911 money. So the accreditation affects what we do in dispatch, but not the actual funding.
Okay. Thank you. Eli, I have a question. I don't know who this would be for.
Yep, go ahead.
Question is that we've been talking about, and this was something brought up by the dispatchers in the letter they sent. And it's talks about how right now we're discussing fire and police, but they also handle calls for the harbor master, animal control, as well as after hours DPW calls. What happens with those?
So I believe that those could all be handled by the regional dispatch if we would like them to. It's a service that they can provide.
Is it some sort of bundling that they do? I know right now they don't charge, but which to me is a big concern that we don't have contracts, but are those included in the not for charge?
Yeah, I believe so, but I would turn to the two chiefs if they know for sure one way or the other.
Becky, I think they are, but again, that's something we would have to clarify with regional dispatch.
Thank you, Todd.
Greg, the $18,000 for the safe lobby in capital costs, I'm assuming that covers the basic equipment to create a secure, safe lobby, and doesn't cover the connecting of the area in front of the police office, the steps there to the lobby walkway, the town hall lobby walkway.
Right, I didn't include that in dispatch because it really needs to happen regardless of what happens in dispatch.
Yeah, what's the current schedule for that happening?
Well, we're sort of back to the drawing board because we did not receive the grant funding that we had hoped for. There'll be another round of that, or it's something that we could think about putting into the capital budget.
What's the current cost of that project estimated?
I want to say it's in the 80,000 range.
Okay. That's all my questions right now. Other board members have particular questions about the write-up that we've been given?
Yeah, Eli, one more question I guess I have. So the board last made a decision to stay the course back in 2015 when this whole regionalization was just starting out. So it's been operating for about 5 years now, I guess. And I'm just curious how many communities it's grown from 0 to how many communities. And I guess back then it was the sheriff's office that was operating it. And the state is now operating it. But do we know about how many communities it serves now?
Yeah, I believe there's five communities participating.
Okay.
It's been at 5 for a while now. I don't think it, I know that at one point Beverly was going to join, but then they bowed out. And I believe Amesbury joined and they were going to bow out, but have they stayed in now? I'm not.
Yeah, they're still there.
Yeah, okay. So I know that Essex and Middleton and Topsfield are part of it, Amesbury.
I saw that.
And
Yeah.
I'm not sure who the 5th one is.
Greg, I have another question. I'm not sure if this goes to you or Chief Cleary, but the question is, the information which the chief, which Chief Cleary sent over talked about the reporting, the software, as well as the mobile data terminals that we would need, that he feels are pretty instrumental. Were those costs factored into your the capital needs?
Yeah, so that's that, if you see in the summary, the 60,000 over a 5 to 8 year period.
Okay, thank you.
And Jason, feel free to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so there would need to be an initial purchase to go along with the dispatching, the dispatching software combined with our response paging software. And the mobile data terminals allow us to get information right in the trucks, to use GIS mapping, hydrant locations, pre-plans. And then based on how fast technology changes, it's likely in 4 or 5 years, the iPads or the mobile data terminals we'd be using would need to be upgraded to stay in tune with the software. So that's where there's an initial purchase, and then there would be capital further down the line to replace those.
Well, and you also mentioned in there that for immediate needs, if we were to stay in-house, that what you'd like to have right away doesn't include data plan, cell service, and all that. Do we have a rough idea as to how much that is?
I'm still trying to work with the companies on that. A lot of that's just based on usage. We would, and depending upon how many vehicles we want to connect. So there's a little more technical work that would have to go in to determine what we would actually need for service in the vehicles. They've never had any mobile data terminals, so it's kind of a new thing.
And my last question would be, it's not that I'm reluctant to use high tech at all, but I'm guessing this is based on, much of it is based on GPS. So if for some reason we have a problem with satellite GPS, what is the backup plan for something like that?
I don't know that there is one. I know it's the same software that the regional center provides, and that they push out things through to the other communities that also have the I am responding paging software. And I know they have redundant systems up there, but I don't know if that would overcome some sort of GIS catastrophe.
Well, I'm asking in general for, and this would apply equally to the police department, if the computers were to go down, how do you all then communicate during a fire?
We do radios. That's primarily how we do everything.
And so you keep that as well. That's your backup.
Yeah, I mean, the radios are something we use 100% of the time, all the time. That's our primary method of communication. This would enhance it along with enhancing our paging capabilities, because right now we're working on a homemade paging system that Officer Chris Jones created. So
Right, right.
it works well, but it's one-dimensional. So we're at a crossroads of needing new reporting software, either going new or updating our current software, as well as needing new paging software as well. So it's the difference between having it provided for us or us needing to purchase it anyway.
Right, and those were all under your immediates, right?
Yes,
Yep. Thank you very much, Chief.
thank you.
Greg,
Eli, if I may,
go ahead, Ann. Yep.
for Greg, I think. How is the Middleton dispatch management organized? You mentioned a board of something that we would have a voice on, but what's the org chart? Where does the money come from? How does it?
So the funding comes from the state. They are part of the state 911 system. And again, I have the chiefs jump in here when I'm not knowing all the details, but nonetheless, so the state is funding the operations. They have an advisory board comprised of the chiefs, primarily the chiefs of the both fire and police chiefs form an advisory board that serve to guide the services and the protocols that the regional center advances and operates under. So the budget is set by the legislators, ultimately, state legislators, Beacon Hill. And they do receive funding through your cell service and the telephones. Everyone pays a surcharge for both cell and landlines that helps fund these the PSAPs throughout the state. So Todd and Jason, please jump in and fill in some more of the details.
Well, I know they have a director, an assistant director. I believe they have somebody over training. They kind of have their system divided up. They have one room with the 911 call takers that has multiple call takers with a supervisor in that room. And then the other room is divided in half, a fire side and a police side, usually with multiple dispatchers on both of those sides, along with one or two supervisors in that room at all times. And then they have their regular dispatching staff that staffs the consoles and mans the radios.
I had a thought and I've lost it. Thank you.
It might have gotten lost in your Mardi Gras beads.
I'll have to check.
Greg, last time we looked at this, before we could move to the rec, there were a number of infrastructure issues related to communications that the town was going to have to take care of before we could actually make that shift. I think the fiber loop communications and some other items. Have we addressed all of those at this point?
Not 100%. One of the best links that we could have, we're still missing a link, and that is through a fiber connection. We have the fiber loop now installed in town, providing service to town hall, fire station, police station, DPW, and out to our various places where the antenna for the radio system is located. So those, we can have the antenna feed, but also a microwave type feed, but we can also have a fiber feed. And if we complete the line up to Essex, which we've been talking about with the school and sharing the cost of that, so getting it to Essex then connects us all the way back to Middleton, because Essex is already connected via that fiber line. And so once we finish the rest of the way going to Essex, then we will have the fiber loop as well as the microwave.
So that would be on us to finish that infrastructure work.
Yeah, that fiber, yes, that fiber line. And as I said, that's already been budgeted and with the school. And so we're just waiting to get that bid and done.
Okay.
Greg,
All right.
is that a prerequisite, or is that something we can add after we?
Well, it's an important piece to the redundancy. So it's not essential, but it's pretty important.
So it's coming up on 7:15. We're running a little bit behind. So what I'd like to do right now is give chiefs an opportunity to speak to any points that you think ought to be called out in the particular set of data here that's been presented tonight. And then I'd like to go around and quickly get a list of any items that the board members would like additional clarifying information on for a subsequent meeting. And then any recommendations for moving forward from this point. So let's go with Chief Cleary first.
Sorry, did you?
Jason, yeah, did you want to
Okay.
just
Um,
summarize your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as I included in the summary of my letter, that what the Regional Dispatch Center has to offer in design, staffing level, training, how it operates, the redundant infrastructure will only serve to allow us to deliver a better fire and EMS product to the citizens here in town. And not to mention the immediate cost savings out of both the police department and the fire department's budget, as well as the future infrastructure cost savings, given that as of this writing, they do provide everything. They provide all the upgrades. And they have a lot of redundancy and they have a huge staff. And part of it is the dispatchers do a great job here, but they're tasked with doing several different jobs alone that still won't be taken care of if we keep dispatch here without spending a significant amount of money. So if I look to the rec as to being a kind of an overall great product based on at least what they have to offer, I would be fine with staying here if the amount of money could be spent to duplicate what they have at the rec here in town, where they have at least one dispatcher assigned to fire, one dispatcher assigned to the police, and maybe somebody else that's taking calls. Simultaneous calls is the biggest hazard for both fire and police. If it's a police call, like the call out they had the other day, then fire is definitely going to take a secondary role because the dispatcher is very busy with everything involved with the nature of the call they had the other day. Similarly, if we had a large fire, it would inhibit their ability to pay enough attention to the police officers who are just as important. And then a delay in bringing somebody in, a lot can happen in the 15 or 20 minutes it takes on both the police and fire side to bring in a second dispatcher. All the while the phone's ringing, people are standing in the lobby, more 911 calls are going out. And I've been in that situation as a dispatcher before, and it's all hands on deck, but you're the only hand. And it's very difficult. So it seems like a more robust product to go to the rec center. But if we could recreate that here, that would be great too, but it would take significant monetary outlay to even come close to offering the same level of service. And that's not to decry anybody's professionalism, dispatcher or police here, there. It's just doing the best with what you have. And if you don't have all the tools, it's an extremely difficult job to begin with. And those tools cost money. So I respect the job they do here because I've done it before. But it can go a whole lot smoother with more personnel, which means more cost, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have any points you want to bring up that weren't covered in the data tonight?
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification, and Greg covered it pretty much from top to bottom. However, on the equipment side, for the police, we're pretty much adequate for at least the next 8 to 10 years. The only thing I think we agree on is our records management system needs to be updated. As far as the training goes, our current dispatchers already can do the same type of training as the rec for emergency medical dispatch. We use the same vendor, ABCO. And, you know, we've been asking for several years for additional fire training. I outlined them in my report, what my thoughts were on the fire training and what we could do to supplement some of those concerns that the fire chief has. As far as 2 dispatchers on, I don't think we need it. Historically, the call volume does not dictate that. Our emergency callback procedure has worked efficiently, like it did the other day when we had the incident on Mill Street. So I guess my questions are, and my concerns are, is a dark police station, number one. What if we decide to go to the rec, what our operation here is going to look like, because it will definitely change from what we know it as is today. And no one can answer why, if there is going to be additional costs down the road from the rec. So say they have 5 agencies in there now, and they max out to the number of 13, and then they come back to the town and say, we need X number of dollars to maintain your dispatch, and then we would be without a PSAP, and we would be maybe spending more money than we spend now. I outlined what it would look like, adding additional staff for our dispatches, and it kind of had a cost savings of not much, but some. And the only other question that hasn't been answered is, you know, like I said, why haven't other departments or other cities and towns gone to it if it's such a attractive item being free for these communities? So that was my only comments.
Okay. All right, so one thing I know for sure is the last time we looked at this, Finance Committee took a pretty good hard look at the finances around the transition, what it would take and how it would benefit us. And numbers are different this time around. So I think for sure, one of the things we're going to want to do is get the Finance Committee to weigh in on this report and provide some input to us. Other than that, do board members have other items that they want to get some more information on? And you mentioned the org charts, I think, and the roles of the advisory boards. I think we could use some more information about the current organization of the rec. Other board members?
Yeah, Eli, I have a question, and really it's Chief Fitzgerald, his last point. This regionalization operation has been there for about 5 or 6 years. I assume it kind of serves all of the North Shore. There have to be 30 or 40 communities up here, and they've only got 5. And I'm really kind of curious what these other communities, and I assume they have looked at it or are aware, and maybe if they're, you know, everybody's got a different reason, but I'm sure that you speak with your colleagues in a lot of the other towns, and this is a topic that's come up, and I'm interested.
Yeah, that's something worth following up on.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in what the other towns are thinking and why. Well, are we missing something here?
All right.
If I may.
Yep.
I have just well, a couple of questions, one of which is specifically for Chief Cleary. And I'm just curious, it just, when you were doing dispatch and you said you were in this situation where it was whose calls get attended to, fire, police. I'm just curious, was that a community of a comparable size to Manchester?
It was several different times when I dispatched in Salem, New Hampshire, just exclusively for the fire department. The fire department dispatched the fire full-time out of the fire station, and police had dispatchers full-time out of the police station. So it would even get busy for me because I would be taking the fire calls and we would have multiple fire events. When I worked in Virginia, we dispatched fire, police, and EMS. And we had two dispatchers on at all times. One took the telephones and handled the fire EMS side, and one handled the police side and all the record checks. And in any situation I've been in with two or one, dispatch can have a tendency to get busy and you can't predict when it's going to happen.
Oh, absolutely. I don't dispute that. I'm just curious, was it, was in Virginia, was it a community of a comparable size?
The town was about 10,000, but it had a university in the center of town that would swell to about 100,000 during the day.
Okay. And I don't know who this question would be for, but if we were to go to the rec center, how specifically, I know it's what, around an 8-month transition period. How is that actually handled? Do we still have our dispatch in the interim? Because with all the new equipment, it takes a lot of time to be trained and brought up to speed. So how specifically is the transition handled between initializing and fully operational?
Becky, you would have the current dispatch system until you would be ready to flip a switch, is my understanding.
Mine as well.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, anything to add?
Not at this time, Eli. I'm good.
Okay. All right. We have a list of a number of different items that we'd like to flesh out, and I would like to get Finance Committee's input on this. So I think we'll move this onto the Finance Committee, and we will go out and try to seek the answers to some of the questions that have been raised tonight and bring them back at a subsequent meeting. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Just one follow-up on the question of that John raised about other communities not jumping into the rec. And my question is, who is going to be responsible for that follow-up?
Well, I was going to suggest that I follow up on it with Greg. If any other board members want to be involved in that, raise a hand. There's Mr. Bob Materner volunteering. Awesome. Okay, we'll split the effort up and we'll bring the information back. All right, let's moving on to agenda item number 2. Compost facility discussion. We originally allotted about 15 minutes to this. Try to move through this quickly. Greg, you want to tee this up?
Sure, thank you. So I think, as folks know, we have been working towards developing a new compost facility at the transfer station up on Upper Pine Street there. And we were able to, after some delays and waiting to get DEP approval to move ahead, we were able to go out to bid with a request for proposal. And this past January, and we did not receive any responsive bids to the request. We did have one vendor with a submittal, but it fell short of the requirements, and not meeting the specifications of the bid documents. And so, so we were faced with needing to pursue an alternative route. In talking with our current vendor who handles picking up the compost and is currently operating the site up on Upper School, they were the vendor who submitted the one bid that it was not 100% complete. They remain interested in a plan B, and the plan B would be scaling back the operations a bit, a smaller facility. And in terms of our process, we would have basically more of a turnkey operation. So we would basically go back out to bid to seek to lease the land to a vendor, and it would be up to the vendor to propose what they, at their expense, would want to construct and want to operate. So it takes us, simplifies the process by taking us out of the business of sort of dictating the scope of the design of the actual facility. Let that be in the hands of the vendor. It would be theirs to operate and own. We would not own the building. They would be the owner of the building, assuming it would be a 20-year lease at a minimum with options to renew. You know, by the time you're up for renewal, the building really will have been fully depreciated. So if that vendor weren't to continue after the first 20 years, then that would be open to somebody else, or that vendor could continue on. So this plan B that we're suggesting simplifies the process a bit. It allows a vendor to come in and propose their own structure and without having to adhere to a lot of detailed specifications on our part. Gives a little more flexibility to them, but it also removes some of the onus on the town as well, and allows the project potentially to go forward. So we would, what we're proposing is that we go back out to bid on a lease basis with a general description of what we want the vendor to provide in terms of processing the town's compost. And so it would have to be sized minimally, at a minimum, to address the long-term needs of the town. So that's probably in the 15-ton range a week for the town needs. If that's assuming everybody is composting curbside. And then they could have a larger facility than that, but not too large, because obviously there's some constraints to the site and just how big of a facility can be built there. And so we would seek vendors to make their pitch as to what they would like to do, and we would pick from 1, 2, or 3, depending on how many responses we get to this new round. So, like I say, it's a slightly different approach. It takes us out of micromanaging what a vendor needs to do. Obviously, we have some performance standards that we want them to meet, which would be in the RFP, but we would leave it up to them as to exactly how they achieve that. And so, assuming you were agreeable to moving forward with this new plan, we would develop the new RFP, get it out on the street. Hope to have bids back by, we're middle of February here, so by the end of March, early April, review those bids and have you review what we would recommend as the winning bidder, and go forward with that winning bidder for a construction project over the summer, and ideally would have the new facility operational sometime in the fall. So that's a high level view of where things stand right now, and happy to try to answer your questions.
I've got a question for Greg Eli.
I was gonna say, I was muted, but I saw Jeff's hand raised, so Jeff's gonna go first.
Go ahead, John, I can follow you.
Oh, all right. Okay, that's fine.
I'm sorry,
So-
Eli. I yield my time to start with to John, but I want time when he's done.
I'll have some time left over for you, Jeff. You got plenty. So, Greg, so the first time around was pretty non-responsive, and I understand that there was a little more micromanaging, or the RFP was a little bit more well-defined than going out the second time. Did you have people that came to us and asked a few questions, said, "Hey, this is not for me, I'm not bidding"? Or how do we know it's going to be any more attractive second time around than it was the first time around?
So there was an expression of interest from a few other vendors. They ultimately decided not to put in a proposal this last time. So we would hope that we would obtain a couple of those as well as our current vendor. I know that the current vendor is very interested in resubmitting and putting in a complete proposal. I think they learned a few things in terms of the RFP process this last time around. So I am hopeful that we would have a credible response that we could bring forth to you.
Okay, yeah, the briefing documents, I kind of got the sense that they didn't have their act together and know exactly what to do, because they were filling out a lot of the paperwork. Seemed a little disjointed.
Right, I think there was a learning curve there, and I'm hopeful that those lessons have been learned.
Greg, if I could just real quick, I think one of the reasons that we didn't have more proposals was, first of all, the timing was, not ideal over the holidays, but, it was kind of had to be what it had to be. And that's because we had the grant aspect from DEP, which has a very hard deadline. And we made that very clear in the documents. And so I'm not sure that people looked at those things in concert and decided that they probably weren't going to be able to be responsive. And so that's why they withheld their response. So if we are now foregoing that, and, allowed to leave it a little bit more time, I'm thinking that we'll get a better response.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, there's, I have 4 different points that I wanted to ask about. My understanding of this proposal is that it would be a build as you go, that they would start to build and build up capacity at the Pine Street area before they shut down and left the School Street. Is that accurate? That instead of being a facility gets built, they move to Pine Street, School Street gets shut down, that it would be a longer term process of operating both areas at the same time?
So Jeff, you can answer that probably better than me, but there'd be a time where you're no longer bringing new material to School Street, but the material that is there would need to basically finish decomposing into good compost, and then you would pick up that product and move it off site once it's finished its composting. So there's a transition period. But Chuck, you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
No, I think that's what I would say. It's a matter of the new food scraps stop at, whatever time, and then you wind down at the other facility, which is the finished curing of the compost that's, already started there. So that's about it.
Without getting totally into the weeds on this, what happens to the functions of the transfer station as they exist now in that transition period? The original comprehensive proposal was also going to deal with those functions of the transfer station. In other words, the vendor was going to take over the whole transfer station area and provide both the compost operation and take care of the recycling and other aspects of the transfer station that exist currently as functions of the transfer station. So what happens to those functions if there's this facility being built at the same time that the transfer station is there, not there? I'm not sure how that works.
So the transfer station operations would continue throughout the construction, just like in the previous submittal. It's something that we had written into the RFP in terms of, the contractor has to allow for this operation to continue. Now, I can't say for a certainty that, our guys wouldn't do that to some point and then we'd have to transfer it over, but that would be a detail that would have to be worked out in either case, I think.
The detail to be worked out in terms of the RFP or the final contract?
Well, certainly in the final contract, but in terms of the RFP, just as that facility is being built, we had in there that they would need to allow for the operation to take place, and we gave the hours, days and hours. Certainly, we would probably discontinue for a certain amount of time the Wednesday shifts, that the transfer station's open, because they'll need, a regular 5-day work week to build. But that, would allow for Saturdays to continue as normal, which I would assume would be town personnel. But the facility itself, the transfer station operations as they exist, would continue throughout.
Okay. In Greg's notes to us and in the presentation, the overview presentation about this tonight, this was presented as a better way of trying to reach the goal that we have, so that we're not in, as the words we use, micromanaging what the vendor does. Now, Chuck, you also added into this that there was that there would be certain specifications that they would need to meet. My question in this regard is the aeration requirement, as it was previously proposed, going to remain in this proposal? One of the biggest problems that townspeople have had about the current compost operation is just to be blunt about it, the stink. And we don't want to have more stink in both Pine Street and School Street at the same time. Is the aeration requirement going to be part of this deal?
So yeah, the biofilter is a requirement of DEP. So there's certain things that, minimum thresholds that will have to be met. And one of them is the biofilter, as well as protecting the cap and so on and so forth. So there's certain elements that will, we also have order conditions with Concom that will, have to be met. So, those are minimum thresholds. Whether or not they'll do it exactly according to the plan that we had laid out before is now less of the micromanaging part of it. And then, I think that the information that I've seen from the vendor and, just going through this process is that, there's ways that the biofilter will remain somewhat oversized for a smaller footprint of the building, which seemed to be the bigger hang up back then. So, I think those things will be in, make it less stinky.
Thank you for that last part. That really was what I wanted to hear.
Yep.
The last question or comment that I had was, how will, I assume that there's going to be consequences for not performing to the standards, whether it's in regard to what we were just discussing, or the cap, or the speed at which this happens. It's not going to happen as fast as it was previously, but there really needs to be a time cap on this so that we recover the School Street property at some point that's defined. What are the consequences for not meeting those performance standards?
I guess I'm open to suggestions. We haven't put it in terms of a penalty or anything like that that I know of. Before it was the risk of losing the grant. Now that ship has sailed somewhat, I would say that we would need to revisit that when we issue another RFP, and we'd have to kind of take a look at a realistic construction period and make sure that we have some sort of liquidated damages within that time frame. But I haven't put a number on that.
Okay, but that's part of what you're trying to roll in.
If I can jump in.
Yeah, Nick.
I think the mechanism, to wind down operations at School Street is within that existing contract. So if we at any point ever felt that they were taking too long, we could say we can give them the notice per that contract, and they have, I think is it 90 days or 180 days to wind down operations at that site.
Yeah, it's somewhat independent.
Yeah. So that would, mean they would need to speed up their construction or whatever they're doing at the Pine Street site.
Or in the event that it's a different contractor altogether that's doing the work at Pine Street, then School Street can happen, at that time.
Yep.
Whenever the town deems fit.
Thank you.
Becky.
Thank you. No, wrong thing. Trying to put my hand down. There we go.
That's all right.
Oh, I did it again. Sorry. Okay, I guess most of my questions have been answered, but I do have one that sort of, I think, piggybacks with one of Jeff. And that is, how do we ensure that what's being done at the facility meets both state and local guidelines?
So, I would think we would have a consultant on site to overview the construction of that facility to ensure it's meeting, the design and specifications that are agreed upon. I think it's better to say that, we had a very rigid set of specifications and plans when we went out for this initial request versus I think this next round will be a more flexible, we'll have a set of specifications and design intents, but they can come in and really propose, we'd like to make the building, these dimensions instead of X, or do X, Y, Z, and this is the benefit to the town. So there is still going to be, a level of oversight, on the town's part to making sure that we're getting what we want.
Thank you, Nate. Is that including after the facility is built and how the day-to-day operations run? I'm sure DP would have, specific guidelines and.
Yeah, so we do third-party inspections of the landfill itself now, and I think what we would have to do is have third-party inspections of the compost facility rolled into that, which would be part of the what we already do. Like I said, the third-party inspection of the landfill. A lot of that will be now making sure that none of the compost operations are affecting the landfill as well. So it's the same thing. There's a different use going on at the landfill.
Thank you, Chuck. And I guess, my last question that is, so what happens after the building is put up and whomever ends up doing it? What happens if that vendor or owner goes belly up? Who owns that? What happens to the facility?
I think that would be something that would be negotiated in the contract. And I'm sure our town council would have, and they did have clauses in the contract that we put out that would handle that. I believe it defaults to the town owning the entire building and everything on the parcel.
The whole smelly mess. Okay, great. Thanks, Nate. All done.
And did you have any comments?
I hate computers. No, this seems like the previous arrangement seemed extremely complicated, and I'm glad to see something that's a little better delineated.
Okay, so what we need tonight is consensus from the board to go ahead and move back out to request for proposals under the basic terms that the town administrator and DPW have proposed. Understanding that those proposals that would then come back before the board for review before we commit.
You need a motion?
Yeah, sure, why not? We can, if we could have a motion to support the town moving back out to request for proposals for compost site at the transfer station site per the parameters outlined to us tonight.
On School Street, right?
Pine Street.
Pine Street.
Well, Pine to move to school?
No, the other way.
Okay, so moved.
Second,
Any discussion? All in favor, Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bob Turner,
yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes,
rolling votes yes. All right, thanks, gentlemen. We'll give this another round, see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. All right, let's move on to item number 3, which is our annual town meeting discussion. We're kind of could be covering 3 different topics underneath here. One is the date of the annual town meeting. We're also going to cover to a certain extent the articles, some of the articles, and some of the logistics and tactics around managing it with relation to the date. And also some fiscal year 22 budget discussion. So after some discussion with Alan and Greg, the proposal that we have right now is that we avail ourselves of Chapter 39, Section 9, and move the annual town meeting date out to the end of June. And the currently proposed date is June 21st. But we're not actually going to commit to that tonight because we need to go, and we did call the school and ask if it would be available at that time. And tentatively, we're told yes, but we would like to make sure that we've got a commitment that the facilities that we need will be available at that time frame. So what I want to do tonight is discuss moving it out, just to decide and commit that whether or not we will do that, and then vote on the actual date when we have everything, have all the information that we need to have in order to do that securely. And Alan, do you want to jump in here and describe how you anticipate running the annual town meeting this year?
I anticipate that it would be very similar, if not identical, to the way we ran it last year on the football field. Hopefully we'll have the clickers working this time and no fog rolling in.
So the presumption is that we want and will need to have the town meeting outdoors again. And this is the primary reason for us pushing the date out. And rather than fiddle around and move it a little bit at a time, the proposal is to just simply commit and do it now so that everybody understands where we're going to end up.
Just a brief explanation on that score. This year we have 2 options for moving the date of the meeting, which we didn't have last year. If the selectmen have not issued the warrant, they can exercise their authority under Section 9 of Chapter 39 to move it once to a particular date. The situation we had last year was that because the selectmen had already issued the warrant, that option wasn't available. Section 9 only applies if the warrant hasn't been issued. And so what I had to do under Section 10 of Chapter 39 was to move it myself, but I can only do it under Section 10A in 30-day increments. I think it's preferable, I think Eli and Greg both think it's preferable to do it just once and not have a serial postponement.
So uh, mm, not wanting to tangle up too much of the discussion about articles. The one thing that does go, one recommendation that is also being made is that we keep the meeting relatively lean and push articles that are potentially going to be relatively controversial out to fall town meeting. So that, again, the annual town meeting would be relatively lean, would cover what we need to do, cover statutorily and from a budgetary standpoint. There aren't any articles that need to go to ballot this year. We're not allowed to, we are not authorized to move the town elections out. So they still have to continue in May this year. So we would be having the annual town meeting if we pushed it out into June after the town elections. Greg, do you have anything to add here before we turn it around to the board for discussion?
Oh, I think that covers it.
All right, board members, comments.
Eli?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I have just a highlighting comment and a question for Alan regarding dates. The date that you suggested was a Monday, and that's when we've traditionally done our town meeting. But is there, in the notes that we received, there was some discussion about the possibility of doing it on a Saturday during the daytime, which may help with any fog coming in. But more importantly, it gives residents an opportunity to be outside during the day and not in the evening. So is that being entertained as a possibility? And if so, or even if not so, if it were to stay on the Monday, what happens with postponing for inclement weather?
Well, to the first question, we've had some discussion about the possibility of a Saturday. There are, pandemic aside, there are a variety of considerations that apply. In a typical year, a Saturday, you're likely to lose young families with children in sports programs. But then you may have an easier time with people who are commuting or whatever. I think it's hard to say which is better, and I don't have any position on it.
What about delays, Alan? Postponements?
For weather?
Yes.
Well, I went back, I think 10 years last year, and found that we had never had 3 consecutive days of rain in June. So if we have a fixed date with a rain date 3 days later, the odds would say we're reasonably safe. The other alternative would be to consider tents or a tent. I think we would need either we'd need several or we'd need a pretty large tent, because I think we may have a much higher turnout this year than we did last year.
Okay, thank you.
Other board members.
I'm good with it as planned, Eli, and keep our fingers crossed that one rain date is good enough, and a 10-year record seems good enough, I think.
I agree, and Jeff asked my question, so I'm all set.
All right. Ann?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Okay, so we don't need to vote on this tonight. I think unless Greg, you want us to vote, but I don't see if there's any concrete actionable item that comes out of it. So we will be committing at this point to moving the annual town out to the end of June. There are some aspects that we need to discuss now about timing, some other things. And we do want to talk a little bit about the articles.
Eli, if I could just add one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to second what Eli said about, to the extent we can, moving out articles that are not time sensitive or essential, and that particularly those that are controversial. From a public health standpoint, as I think you all know, even outdoors, the longer you keep people in a meeting, the higher the risk. And I expect that's going to be the case in June as it is now.
Now, there is, I think, an operating presumption that in the fall, we will be able to we'll hold an annual town meeting indoors. That is an operating assumption that we're running here.
And if that's the case, and I certainly hope that it is, we should have available to us the new space in the new elementary school, which will accommodate, I think the number is something like 700 voters if we had that many. It will also allow for much more sophisticated audiovisual displays than we've had in the past. We can put articles and motions and potential amendments for the floor up on a screen in real time where everybody can see them.
Now, so one of the items that Sarah Mellish brought up last week when we mentioned we might be doing this is that, so this surrounds the recodification, the zoning board, the zoning bylaw recodification work. It turns out that once the planning board holds their first hearing on zoning bylaw, zoning board of appeals applications that would be affected by those bylaws have to be put on hold until the bylaw changes acted on. And since the recodification covers, the entire zoning bylaw, that would basically put all zoning board of appeals applications on hold as soon as the planning board held its first hearing on this topic. So this ultimately will affect how the planning board does its public hearings, or at least they're going to have to hold public forums as opposed to actually starting their formal public hearings. But in addition, after some discussion with Alan, the feeling is right now it will be difficult to and unwieldy to try to handle the zoning board of appeals or the zoning board, the zoning bylaw recodification work in an annual town meeting that's being held outdoors. Whereas if we hold it indoors at the new elementary school facility, we'll have the advantage of the audiovisual support that Alan just mentioned. So right now, what we're proposing is that we ask the planning board to, push their schedule out to put the votes on the zoning board, zoning bylaw recodification into the fall town meeting. And Ron, if you want to have any comments that you want to make here, I'll accept that. And if board members have any comments or questions about that, now's the time.
No comments, Eli. We're just going to discuss it with the board at our next meeting.
Okay.
Eli, one comment if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I think at a fall special town meeting indoors with the technical capabilities that we should have available will provide a much better venue and forum to have a robust discussion of comprehensive recodification of the zoning bylaw. Having it outdoors in the spring, even if the weather cooperates, I would be afraid that voters would feel rushed and pushed to get out early before it gets dark, before the fog rolls in, whatever, and not feel that they were being given an adequate opportunity to debate and consider proposed amendments. So I think there's a substantive advantage to pushing it out.
Okay. So I think now we're into the discussion of the other articles that we currently have that potentially are going on into town meetings. So we do have 4 petition articles. Those have to be put forward. There's the citizen petition articles. And those are required to be put onto the annual town meeting warrant regardless. We also had a few items from last year's town meeting that I'll turn to Greg to discuss. Yeah, let's do that now. Greg, go ahead.
Okay, so last June, we passed over a couple of articles. One was the local option of having a room tax on short-term stays. So the Airbnb type rentals would pay a room tax that would be collected on our behalf. So that was passed over just for streamline purposes. So that's one. That may not be a simple one. That may garner some debate. So you may want to hold off on that one again. Another one was a local option for placing liens on rental properties when the renter does not pay a utility bill. So this would enable us to ultimately collect that unpaid utility bill from the property owner. I don't anticipate that being very controversial, but so it's possible that we could proceed with that if you were comfortable keeping that on the warrant. Though again, it's not essential. It's something that if it was getting late and it was toward the end, you could just pass over it and sort of give yourself that option maybe. There's another one that was not on last year but has come up in the meantime, and that is the question of, again, it's a local option in the statutes that allows localities to require sprinkler systems for buildings that are for congregate living. And any existing dwellings under such a bylaw would have up to 5 years to come into compliance with such a requirement. So again, not essential in terms of, it's a must-have. It's something that could wait, but it has been something that has been talked about during the past year. Certainly, from the fire perspective, they would very much like to see us adopt such a bylaw.
And you had a question there?
Yeah. I'm not sure what congregate living encompasses.
So I don't have the definitions in front of me. It would be multi-unit apartments and congregate living. It would be a combination of, but I'll get to the exact.
It includes apartments, and it would include sober by the sea sort of thing.
Right. Yes.
Thank you.
But again, let me get to the exact definition of what it what would qualify.
So we don't, we have time to formulate what's going in and what's not going into the warrant in terms of these articles. So this is really to give everybody an opportunity to have very initial discussion about how we want to prioritize those things or what steps we want to take. We'll be finalizing the warrant some weeks from now at this point. So we're not required to hash all of these out tonight, but any comments the board members want to make, go ahead.
Eli, just what happens to petition articles that are proposed going forward until 60 days before the meeting?
Those have, well, I'll let Alan answer that actually.
What town council has advised us is that once you move the meeting date from the current April 5th, I think it is, the deadline for filing petition articles rolls forward with it. So it would be 60 days prior to whatever date you ultimately choose.
So actually, there's a really pedantic aspect to that. We haven't actually voted to move the date forward. So currently, it's the official date from a legal standpoint. So that date doesn't roll forward until we actually vote, which does that technically mean that if somebody were to submit a petition article tomorrow, it would be invalid or rejected? Or would it become valid once we voted to move the date forward?
I didn't ask that question, so I don't know the answer. It's a good one.
Okay.
Eli, in that same light, all the citizen petition articles specify the April 5th date as part of the articles. Would they have to be resubmitted for the rolled date? Let's refer to it as such, the June date.
No, the existing petition articles would carry forward because they were in on time under either scenario.
Even though they specify town meeting on April 5th.
Right, because it wasn't their fault that we changed the date.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave those people flat. One last comment as well in terms of when we actually set the date. That there's a pent-up demand for people to travel. And since we're moving this to a time that's after school is done for the year, it may be important to have a set date, not before school ends, but may be important to have a set date so that people can make their plans if they wish to attend town meeting. I don't want to have people excluded because they said, well, you didn't set it. And then, 30 days in advance or whenever it is that we have to set it, they've already made their vacation plans.
If I understand your point, Jeff, I think I agree, which is that I shouldn't say we, because it's really your decision, but it would be desirable to set that date as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That is my point, Alan.
Yeah. If we had the legal vehicle to do it, I believe we do. I would like to do that at our next meeting, which I think is March 1st.
March 1st.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. I think that's timely enough.
All right. Other comments on articles? Alan, did you have anything else you wanted to add on those?
No, thanks, Eli.
All right. So we can start communicating on the date changes to the boards. Obviously, we have a bunch of the boards, elements of the boards here already tonight, but I'll make sure that FinCom is made aware. And we'll finalize this at our next meeting. Greg, FY22 budget.
So work continues. The Finance Committee is working its way through the many departments and we'll continue to do that, to pick it up this. You're scheduled to meet with the Finance Committee in a joint meeting this Thursday to focus on capital and the community preservation requests. And so that's this Thursday at 7. So in looking at the overall budget, I think the sort of the big issues that are looming, sort of front and center, I think, is the school district budget. I think as we discussed briefly last time, there's a request from Essex that instead of the 3.5% increase, overall spending increase that the district has approved as a budget to go forward to the voters, Essex is requesting that increase be 2.5%, and that the district dip into its reserves much deeper than it already is planning to, in order to come in at a 3.5%. I'm sorry, at a 2.5% increase instead of the 3.5. Because of the proportionate formula and the way enrollment has been going the last few years, Essex's enrollment has increased relative to ours, to Manchester's. And so a 2.5% overall budget increase translates to a 2.9% increase for Essex, and it would be closer to a 2.2 increase for Manchester. Obviously, a 2.5% overall budget increase using reserves to make up the difference is not sustainable long term. And so it either will require a significant restructuring of school operations, or it, hold on, I need to plug in my computer before I fade out on you. Sorry about that. I meant to do that before starting. All right. So it'll, obviously, it either means a significant reduction in operational costs going forward, restructuring, or it locks in doing an override vote, probably sooner than originally anticipated. So neither choice is all that attractive, and yet Essex is facing some difficult budgetary decisions as they try to work on their 22 budget. So at the last collaborative meeting, it was proposed that we try to get all the committees and boards together, the 2 boards of selectmen, the 2 finance committees, and the school committee together in a room or over Zoom to view what is the best strategy and perhaps come to an understanding of what the longer term strategy should be here. And so Essex has thrown out a few dates, and we will try to coordinate that. They're looking at potentially a few dates next week or into March. Obviously, scheduling can be a bit complicated given everything that's going on right now, but we'll get out some dates and assess what can work for the majority of you. But I do think it will be important to sit down as a collective, both towns and the school sitting down together in order to work through this question of how best to proceed. So that's, I think, probably the biggest challenge in terms of the budget coming together. I think the second big question, again, it's a perennial one that we've grappled with over the last few years, and that is the question of number of full-time staff in the fire department as we continue to struggle to attract call firefighters. We have literally a handful left, and of those 5, 2 or 3 are somewhat responsive to calls, but it leaves us short if there are simultaneous calls for the ambulance or if there is a large fire. So the ideal staffing is to have 4 people respond to every fire call. There's what's called the 2 in, 2 out rule. So you always have 2 firefighters on the outside of a structure fire if you're sending into the fire, and then you would want to have your command person in addition to those 4. And so in order for us to guarantee that now, we would need to add 1 person to each of our 4 crews. We have 4 3-person crews now. And so the standard staffing is 3 people on 24/7. And we do have a floater that when one of those 3 is on leave, on vacation or sick day, then the floater fills in so that we always have the 3. So going to a 4-person staffing and still have the floater would require hiring 4 new people. If we were to convert the floater into one of the crew members, then we could hire 3 and then either do overtime or just keep 3 when there's a leave time situation. So this is, like I say, a discussion that has, we've had it for the last 4 or 5 years. We've always decided not to add to the staff, but it is an issue that keeps coming back. And so that's deserves some additional discussion. The Finance Committee continues to debate it. I think they would be interested in your viewpoints on this as well. And then the third one relates to whether we want to move forward with the change in dispatch or not. If we're keeping it in-house, then are there some additional expenditures, especially on the capital side, that we wish to do in FY22, or is it something we address in FY23? If you feel like we'll be moving towards the regional center and you want to set that in motion, then we probably should budget for the capital improvement in the lobby in order to make that a safe lobby and connected to the regional center. So that would be in addition to our current capital budget. So those are the 3 major issues I see as we continue to shape the budget. Like I say, on Thursday night, we'll be diving into some detail with the capital budget. It will need some revising. I'll have some new sheets for everybody for Thursday night as we look at some revisions to that capital plan. So that'll be a 4th area of discussion as we hammer things out. So again, happy to answer questions or take your comments on any of those topics.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Eli. Greg, in your notes for tonight, you said that in terms of the fire department hires, that grant funds could potentially pay for the new hires for the first 3 years. Is that payment in full?
Yes, it is. So it's what's called the SAFER grant program through the federal government. And so it used to be a sliding scale where they paid 100% the first year, 75%, 50%. But now the program has been reconfigured and they pay 100% of the costs, both salary and benefits, for the first 3 years. And then the locality is obligated to pick up 100% of the costs starting in year 4.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Greg, I have a question also. Is there some of the thinking that if things move to a regional arrangement, some of those monies that might be saved would kind of contribute to these fire, to these new firemen as well?
Yes, I mean, that certainly makes, from a budgetary standpoint, it certainly makes it easier to do that. So if you were able to save, on the low end, that 136,000, and the high end closer to 290,000, that obviously helps in this staffing need situation.
Okay. I guess my point is that there are always plans for money.
There's no lack of what we could do with the money.
It's not like, oh, let's save this.
Yeah, there's always needs out there. I can't, but it's always, you may get tired of me hearing me say it, but it's always those choices.
Becky, you have any comments, questions?
Not at this time. Thank you, though.
Ann?
Lots to think about. But no questions right now.
All right, well, we'll be taking up all things finance related with the finance committee on Thursday. All right, well, and Greg, unless you had anything else, or Alan, unless you had anything else, I think we're done with agenda item number 3. Alan, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. If it's okay with you, I will sign off at this point.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Alan.
Good night, everybody.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 4, 40B project update and discussion. So we had a last round, previous second round of negotiations last week. We need to pick a time when we're going to be meeting with a developer. And this is an opportunity for board members to ask for any additional information that we need in advance of that meeting. I will say we're planning on talking about the environmental aspects, and currently our position remains that we'll be asking the developer, we have asked the developer to stick with their original septic on site plan and not connect up to the town sewer. Specifically within environmental, we already have on our agenda or on our list of conditions to talk about no irrigation, limiting them to their water use to those that really would be basically within the units themselves, which is manageable. And then as far as pollutants are concerned, we want to hold them to a gold standard on what they can introduce into the recharge zone, both from stormwater runoff and from whatever comes out of their septic system. Also intended to protect the local ecological concerns and our water supply. So any comments or questions about those items from board members? Anything that you are going to want in advance of that meeting or better defined? Probably we should reiterate those items to the developer. At the last meeting, it was his plan to quote unquote, come to us with all his cards on the table. We have continued to receive communications from him indicating that he wants to wrap up the negotiations soon. We are going to continue to try to do those negotiations on a timeline that allows us to get the best information that we can. Comments, questions from board members, and proposals for when we should arrange to do our next negotiation session with them.
Yes, Eli, you're checking in with him periodically. He's also going to come back with some comments on the sidewalk topic.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything back from him yet. I don't believe. Is that correct, Greg?
Correct.
Okay. But conservation and sidewalk, I think, were the two major issues that he was going to address.
Mhm.
Eli, if I may.
Yep.
I'd like to make sure that he provides us well in advance of the meeting. We'd asked him to, explain why he asked for the specific bylaw or regulation. Regulations he did, and he was supposed to get back to us with that. So I'd like to make sure we actually get that far enough in advance that we can
Discuss it among ourselves.
Well, I don't know that we, mostly just so that we can have the information.
And get feedback from other boards.
Yes.
So we did tell them that
Yes.
we were going to go back to get feedback.
Yes, I just want to make sure of that one.
Okay, so that's a good point. So I would say that if we set the meeting 2 weeks after we received whatever we deem as the critical collection of information,
Right.
that would probably be okay. So some of the information he said might take him a little bit longer to get. Some of the sidewalk information, the wetlands information, he said this week. So the sidewalk information he thought could be a good couple of weeks out. That's going to be whether or not he can do it in financial numbers. If he comes out, do board members want us to set the meeting 2 weeks after we receive the sidewalk information, or 2 weeks, or a minimum of 2 weeks after we receive the wetlands information, specifically the waivers?
Can we say 2 weeks after whatever we receive latest?
Yeah, whichever is later.
That way maybe he might get it all in at one time. Or not. I'd just say go to the latest.
Eli,
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was one of the protagonists regarding the wetlands bylaws and the waiver. And it seemed to me in our last session that his approach to this was that he had to have that from the board, that waiver, the waiver of whatever number of bylaws. And that he wanted it from us as part of the agreement. My concern is if we go to him and say, if you get us that stuff, then we can consult with our boards, and that he's going to think that we can come back with a decision about whether we as a board of selectmen are going to waive these highly technical bylaws in his application to the state. And I think that that's a mistake. I wanted to know why he was asking for so many. It seemed like, check, 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 check. And he said that he would give justification for every single one of those. But I also don't want to encourage his train of thought that we as a Board of Selectmen are going to endorse a waiver of all those bylaws.
So, check me if I'm wrong, but I think that he made that comment or a set of requests because in our first round with him, one of the conditions that we put in was that he adhere to all of our wetlands bylaws.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I think that one of the conditions that we initially put in was that we, in that first list of conditions, was that we asked him to adhere to all of our wetlands bylaws.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is.
That was number 8.
Right. That's a fairly broad brush, and the whole point behind 40B, well, one of the big points behind 40B is they get to skip over the local wetlands or conservation bylaws. So we I think his list of waivers was in response to our asking this very general condition, which was going to bind him. So that's why I think he asked that.
Eli,
But there's a bit, I'm sorry, Becky, let me just finish this aspect of what I was trying to bring up. There's a big leap between saying adhere to all the wetlands bylaws and him saying, here's 17 or 19 different bylaws that I'm not going to adhere to. And I want you to endorse that I don't have to. So that's just, I understand what you're saying, but it seems like excessive. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Eli, you can take Becky's question if you wish.
Well, mine was really along what you're talking about, Jeff. I thought at the last meeting that when we were speaking with Mr. Engler, that when we were talking about the wetlands bylaws, that we said specifically we wanted to be able to discuss with Concom. And I thought that was why he was going to be getting back to us regarding what he had cited in terms of, bylaws and regulations. Is that, nobody else remembers that?
I think that's correct.
I think that's correct.
Will 2 weeks give us time to consult with the Concom?
Well, probably not if we run necessarily on the regular Concom schedule, but we can ask them to, opine on it more quickly.
I think that he's going to come back and all of these regs that he has listed, he has compared that with the DEP, because on more than one occasion he has said, I will meet all of the DEP regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every single bylaw that he has checked off, if the DEP says 50 feet and we say 100 feet, he checks that off and says, I'm not doing 100 feet. I only have to do 50 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what he's coming back with. And that's why he's saying, I can't comply with these because the DEP says I can comply with something that's not as stringent. Now, I don't know whether he has evaluated that and looked at it and said, even though the DEP says 50 feet and you say 100 feet, I don't have any problem with any of these 100-foot distances for my particular plot. I don't know if he's gone into that kind of detail here. And there might be some negotiation space if that's the case, but that's a lot of time to look at stuff.
It is. So what it comes down to is, as always, if we continue the negotiations, we're not going to get everything we want. We have to find a way to figure out what's important to us in that collection. And I mean important as in, what would you give up to get it?
So is there anything preventing us from asking Concom to respond to the existing request? I mean, he's gonna give us his justifications for those things. And it may be along the lines that John just raised, that, this is more stringent than DEP and I only have to pay ball with DEP. But is there any reason why we can't give our Concom that list and say, can you please respond to this?
Yeah, you certainly can, and they're prepared to do that.
Okay, because I think that they could get going on that list without waiting for him to give his response.
Right, they're working on that. They're working on the basic list now.
And then the second question is, do we need to run them by John Whitten to have him respond to the comparison that John Round was just making? That is, which of these, we know which of them is more stringent than DEP's. Do we need to run any of that past John Whitten?
Yeah, I think the answer would be yes.
So if we could get a list of the regs that he raised, vetted by Concom in regard to which local bylaws are stricter, more stringent, more restrictive, and get that list to John Whitten, we could move that now as well.
Well, but some of those are simply definitions that he said were just far too.
If it's defined though, Becky, differently than DEQ does.
No, I get that.
And DEP.
DEP, I followed that too. The letters are very close to each other.
So the alternative here is to say this is an issue that is going to require a lot of analysis and probably consultant review. And it may be something that you leave for the ZBA to deal with, and they will ask the Concom to have their peer reviewer assist with all this in the ZBA proceedings. That's just an alternative. You don't, obviously you can deal with it now, or you have the option of saying, these are really the details of the project that need full review by Concom, by a consulting wetland specialist under a peer review process that is best left for the ZBA.
I mean, ultimately, if we write a condition, what we're going to do is we're going to take his list and we're going to invert it, right? And we're going to say, developer agrees not to ask for a waiver from the following wetlands bylaws.
Right, otherwise we're tying the ZBA's hands. We are, and I, as Greg said, these are deep waters. And I just assume, I think we should look at his list. And if there's anything that's obvious and simple, go ahead. But if there's anything that we think needs deep study, then I think it should be pushed off to the ZBA.
I think Eli has a good idea here. I mean, for example, they said, I don't like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, etc. And he has really put it in a sense that it's non-negotiable. It doesn't meet what I want, and I don't have to meet it. However, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, he hasn't said any problem with those. And so we can certainly hold him to all of those others that are in our bylaws. And then that's off the table.
Eli, this is Sarah Mellish.
Yes, Sarah.
I think that what people need to take into consideration is the more waivers you grant, the less opportunity you give to the ZBA to impose conditions. And if we impose conditions, if they don't like it, it's my understanding it goes to the court system rather than back to the state for approval.
So my understanding, for the wetlands, when he asked it, and when he goes to get waivers from the conservation laws and the wetlands restrictions, he doesn't automatically get those waivers. He has to go to the state period to get the waivers. Oftentimes they'll just give them to him, but he actually does have to. The only way that we really can constrain him is to get an agreement with him which says that he won't ask for any waivers for particular sections of the bylaw. So I don't actually view this as us saying, hey, yeah, we'll grant you waivers at the Board of Selectmen level from the following parts of the zoning bylaw or the conservation laws. Like I said, I meant it when I said we would invert it. We're going to flip it around and only present conditions based on the ones that we don't want them to appeal.
Didn't he seem to indicate that if we didn't provide these waivers to him, that it was essentially a no-go with the Board of Selectmen?
Well, that would be true if he was agreeing to our condition, our broad condition, to a very broad condition, which said he wouldn't appeal any of the wetlands laws.
Yep.
Now, Jeff, I'd like to ask where are you landing on this? When you asked for that condition to be put in, you realize it was a pretty large condition, right?
When I asked for the condition about abiding by our local wetlands bylaws,
Yeah.
I don't recall that I was the one that asked for that, but I would certainly want him to do that. I mean, if there's two perspectives. The perspective is if we grant waivers, then we're limiting the ZBA and the Concom.
Mm-hmm.
The second perspective is that we get out of the granting of waivers or of asking for compliance with the local bylaws and leave it up to the ZBA and the Concom to address this directly with the developer.
Right, unless there are particular areas about the local bylaws that we really, really feel extremely strongly about and want to provide cover for the zoning board that the zoning board can't otherwise acquire, right? He can appeal any of those wetlands bylaws to the state and get waivers granted by the state, unless we do something to pin him down.
Right.
So if part of this exercise to go through that list of things that he says, I gotta have waivers on these and see where some of those waivers are too painful for the town, where people or the Conservation Commission feels particular ones are exceedingly important to that region, then we can switch up our conditions and protect those particular items.
And are we willing to go to the mat for that?
Right. I don't know. I don't know what the prevailing opinion is.
Without knowing what those regulations are, it's really hard to take a position.
It is.
Mhm.
So we'll, at a minimum, we'll be getting that summary from the Concom. They're reviewing that list of his and giving us a description of what each of those mean.
All right. So this
In comparison, Greg, to the state regs?
we'll have.
I'll make, yeah, I can ask that, yes.
I think that's pretty important.
Yeah,
So we're clearly going to have some additional discussion around this after we get some more information at our board level. So that's going to be March 1st. So the earliest that we would meet with the developer again would be March 4th. And I think what we could do is tell the developer, this is our plan. We're getting the information from Conservation Commission regarding, we'll be getting information from the Conservation Commission and staff regarding the wetlands bylaws. After we get your list of information, we'll be discussing that again at our next board meeting, and then we'll, the earliest we could meet would be the 4th. Is
I
the
thought we
4th
said
open?
I thought we said 2 weeks from.
Well, 2 weeks from when we got his information. We could put it to him, assuming that we get your information by the end of this week. We would be able to meet again on the 4th.
Does that include the sidewalk information, or can we, what are we gonna do about that?
Do we need the sidewalk information plus 2 weeks? I mean, John?
I don't think we have to do the due diligence with that. He's going to tell us where he stands.
Yeah.
You know, so there's not a lot of, I mean, this conservation thing is, we're on a learning curve here. We have to get an awful lot more informed, but I don't think that's the case with the sidewalk. So no, we don't need as much time. We'd like certainly a few days to think about it. But.
All right. So assuming that we have, so the message to him would be, assuming that he provides all of the information that he promised about the wetlands bylaws by the end of the week, we will go around to our conservation folks and discuss at our next board meeting, and then we'd be able to meet again after that, again, which would be March 4th. So adding the proviso that he gets the information to us by the end of this week. And let me just double check. That's by the 19th. 2 weeks from that would be, oh, hey, no, that's not good enough.
2 weeks from that is the 5th.
Yes, it is. Well, we're not going to meet on Friday on that. So that's all right. So if he gets it to us by Thursday, then we can meet March 4th. And if he doesn't, we'll just get back to him. Well, we'll just move it out a week at a time. How about that? March 11th. Just using Thursdays and bumping. All right with that?
Yep.
Jeff, you're muted. or muted or something. Not muted. Something terrible happened to Jeff. He's just.
I'm losing my voice, Eli. If he gets to us by the 17th, are we then scheduling on the 3rd? I don't want to go any earlier than the 4th.
No. We're not doing exactly 2 weeks. I'm just going to make it Thursdays. So we get the benefit of rounding up. So if he goes to Friday the 19th, then it's going to be Thursday the 11th.
Got it.
And if he goes to past the 18th, then he's going 1 week past that. All right.
All right.
Yep.
So at that meeting, he's going to come with, quote, all his cards, and we are going to be discussing, environmental, at which point we'll have discussed in public meetings with him all of the items on our conditions list. And then we're going to have to go back around to the business of seeing which of the pieces each party can tolerate being put together into an agreement, and whether or not they can be. I know that he'll want to accomplish that meeting. I don't know that we'll have all the information that we need to do so. I think we'll let a little bit more information come in before we try to deal with that aspect of the problem. All right, any other questions, suggestions, comments on the 40B topic right now?
No, I think that's a good plan.
All right, moving on to item number 5, the consent agenda. One is the Board of Selectmen meetings minutes from February 1st, and the second is the return of leftover funding from the 375th celebration startup funding account. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, so that was moved by Jeff, seconded by Becky. Any discusussion? All in favor, Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Yes, with a thank you to the 375th committee.
yeah. Mr.
I think that was me, and yes, sir.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes,
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, correspondence. We have letter from Senior Care regarding a contribution to Council on Aging. Letter from Mass DOT regarding MBTA forging ahead service proposal, and a letter from Xfinity regarding the programming advisory. More channel information. It's awesome. Any comments, questions on the correspondence? All right, Town Administrator's report.
So I'll start off with COVID updates. Pleased to say that the vaccination clinic for residents 75 and older this past Saturday went very smoothly. Again, have to Lufkin and efforts pulling together a very smooth operation. We teamed up with Conley's Drugstore, who provided the actual vaccines and the vaccinators. We ended up putting 303 shots into 303 different people's arms.
Wow.
So that was a good day, and we actually could have done more in that 4-hour period. There were some lulls. There were some lulls that we could have processed more if we had had more vaccines and more doses and more people. So overall, again, it went very well, and hats off to a large group of volunteers who helped. Conley's brought a very large group of their own, and it just went very, very smoothly. And I think people were very grateful for the local opportunity. So the folks who had their shots this past Saturday, they will do a repeat in 3 weeks on March 6th for their second dose. We continue to be looking for opportunities to do additional clinics. We would love to team up with Conley's going forward. And it will really depend on the availability of vaccine. So we will continue to monitor that, and we'll continue to post updates on the town website as we learn more information, not only possibly our own clinic, but also what the state is doing for additional clinics and what other pharmacies might be doing. So we'll continue to try to provide that information to people so that they have it, and that hopefully as we move down through the tiers and the different phases, we can facilitate people getting their vaccines just as soon as possible. Luckily, we are seeing case numbers back down into the low single digits for new cases each week. So that's good news. And if people keep doing what they need to be doing as we all wait to get our vaccination. And I know it can be hard to wait, but we need to be as patient as we can, and we will continue to provide as much information as possible and facilitate where we can. So that's the COVID update for now.
Greg, quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
On that March 6th date where you're contemplating the second shot, is that also going to be available for people who may not have made the most recent, the thing on Saturday, and they could get a first shot on March 6th as well?
So it all depends on his number of doses that he can obtain. So right now he's struggling to have the doses for the 303 that received it. So that's stay tuned. If he's able to get more vaccines, then yes, we would love to do that.
Fine.
So just a quick update on construction. Work continues at Singing Beach with the revetment work. Should be wrapping up hopefully in another week or so, depending on the weather. And also work on the seawall at West Beach continues. You recall that we had our hopes raised a bit that FEMA might come forward and approve 2 more sections of reconstruction. And it looks like that they'll approve 1 more section, not 2 more. But we'll take it. It's better than just the 1, so we can get at least 2 sections done, and FEMA pays 70% of that. So that work will continue. Third item here, just an update. I think folks know that there was an unfortunate death of a resident of Sober-by-the-Sea up on Crooked Lane. And there's been investigation by the DA's office. They are continuing the investigation. Of course, it raised concerns about the operation of the sober home. We've had a meeting with residents of the neighborhood, tried to answer as many questions as we could. There are some operational questions that we will be following up on as to whether or not they trigger some additional licensing or permitting. And so we continue to work with council on that, and work with the appropriate state licensing boards for their guidance as well. So that continues to be a work in progress. So with those 3 items, I'll finish up there.
On the revetments and the FEMA, the additional section of the Saturday, you're going to need us and FinCom to take any action.
They were also in favor, similar to you, that we try to take advantage of the funds that they might offer and either use a reserve fund transfer or seek some additional dollars at town meeting.
All right. Any other questions, comments from the board? All right. I have no other matters as may not have been reasonably anticipated by the chair. We will be moving into executive session. So
Eli, if I could just interrupt. So
Yeah.
I really don't have a whole lot more to add. I was hoping I would have more information. I mean, I'm happy to go into executive session and answer questions people have. But there's not a whole lot more to share than what I put in the package.
Jeff's nodding his head. You have questions? I'm going to read your lips and say yes.
Yes.
A motion to move into executive session, not to return to open session. Under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, Section number 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Motion, please.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
so seconded by Ann, moved by Jeff. And a roll call discussion? No, roll call vote, Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bob Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes.
There is an extra window for me. My computer is behaving badly, so I have something on backup that doesn't have any audio yet. So that if you cannot cancel the flowers, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I will. All right. Everybody else, thanks for joining tonight. At this point, we will be moving into executive session.
May I ask for a 5-minute?
A 5-minute break?
Yes, please.
Yep,
Or 2 minutes.
2 minutes, bio breaks. All right. As soon as everybody's back in front, I'm going to start things back up. All right, we got everybody. Jeff, go.
Greg, I had two questions. One is, you said that the main sticking point was the COLA and full Quinn. We had nuanced things a little bit on Quinn, I think, and said no to COLAs as Quinn goes into full swing. And is there any movement whatsoever there, or are they just sticking to their original position?
They're nibbling at the edges on their COLA request, but they're still asking for a fairly big COLA every year. They gave up the COLA in year one. They said a 0 COLA in year one, but they asked for 1.5 and 2.5 after that, I think.
And that's 2.5 in the third year was higher than what they had originally asked for, right?
Yes.
And 1.5 was the same.
Yes.
Okay. What are the implications of going to arbitration? Is it binding?
It is.
And in my experience in negotiations, we've had to go to binding arbitration previously. The choice of the arbitrator is not arbitrary. It's really important. Are there any thoughts that you have about how that process works and what your past experience is with it?
So I've never had to go to full arbitration before the JLMC. I always settled before that. So it's a 3-panel board. There's supposedly a management favored panel member, a labor favor, and then a so-called neutral. And the 3 of them hash it out. Recent decisions from the JLMC are encouraging to me in terms of the Quinn. They have declined to give 100% Quinn. They have basically said that's something that should be negotiated, is not something that we as arbitrators want to rule on. So they typically have kept Quinn where it is and given people COLAs. I'm okay with that. I'd be pretty happy if we walked away with the little spike in the COLA, but Quinn staying where it is today. Our labor council feels that, you know, they might come back with 75% Quinn, not 100% Quinn, and modest COLAs. But he doesn't feel we're going to get. He doesn't feel the arbitrators will award everything the union is asking for.
That the arbitrators will not overrule everything?
Will not. He does not believe that an arbitrator will give them full Quinn and the COLAs they have requested.
What about what we're asking for, which is the 60, 75, 100, I think it is, right?
Right. And zero COLAs. He
and
thinks
zero COLA.
Right. He thinks they'll probably. So that's not what we would be going into with arbitration. Because our last official position is much less generous than that. But he does feel that we would end up with some modest COLAs and some increase in the Quinn.
Last official position was no change in Quinn and some modest COLAs.
Our last official position was going to 60% Quinn and then fix that dollar amount. So no longer a percent, but you go to 60% and convert that to a fixed dollar amount going forward. And then we had the more typical COLAs.
So it's a year-to-year stipend, and they move on their COLAs on their base.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That helps to clarify my questions.
So what the mediator wanted us to do was to run each individual officer's numbers, show them what the full quin actually gets them in dollar amounts, so that they have a better appreciation of the large asks that they, I mean, I can't imagine they haven't done it yet, but
Or that they care?
that they care. Yeah, it's a good question.
I think they know what it is and that's why they want it.
Well,
In the proposal as it exists for 60, 75, 100, is that integrated into base?
No, it doesn't increase the base. So if they have a zero COLA, then they're just getting that higher quin. As a,
Okay,
so
but in the next round of negotiations, will the COLA apply to their quin?
so their base will go up, and then their quin will be calculated on a higher number
Based on the COLA?
based on the COLA.
It would be good if we could get the quin out of the COLA altogether.
Correct. That's why I like the flat, the fixed amount, the stipend approach, rather than a percent.
Does that impact compensable pension money?
Yes.
Okay.
So unless you have other words of wisdom, I will continue sort of along the same lines of either they get a win on the quin or they get a COLA, but they don't get both.
Or they get a low COLA and quin remains a flat stipend.
Yes, I agree with that. And we've offered that,
And they said no.
and they've said no. Anything short of the standard quin, they have said no to.
all about that pension.
Well, it's still compensable in their pension.
Yeah, but that doesn't accrue.
It doesn't accrue.
I'm also told that, again, the rank and file are not being kept abreast of what the two ringleaders are pushing for. So
You're being told that by Todd, or?
told by Todd through his conversations with Mark, who has had conversations with many of the officers.
And they're okay with that?
Well, there seems to be some growing dissension. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know how long they're going to stay together.
Because they don't like the idea of being dragged into mediation or arbitration?
I think some of them feel like they've been offered a very good deal and they should have taken it by now. I think
So how much,
some are getting cold feet that they're going to lose out on the full Quinn here because I'm not sure that the arbitration decision is going to give them full Quinn.
how much dissent, Greg?
I don't know. I don't have a good sense of that.
Has Todd been weighing in much?
Yeah, he's been helpful. He's had some good side conversations with their rep and also with some of the officers, but it hasn't reached to the two negotiators. They're holding out.
Seems like this is where Todd really could be doing his part.
It's a little dicey. My concern there would be an unfair labor practice. If he's talking to membership and he's management, aside from the negotiators,
Yeah, okay.
that starts to blur the line.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line.
And you don't want to get into them saying, okay, this is what you've done, and we're going to do an unfair labor practice against you.
I'm glad you know this stuff, Jeff.
I know a little of it. I've done a few of these.
Exactly.
But I also know it in a different context. And
But it's experience with it. I mean, I've never dealt with anything like this, so it's nice to have the insight.
So we're scheduled to meet again on the 5th, I think it is.
it's a Friday.
March 5th, Friday. Another go around with mediation, and then if we're not successful then, I think it's on to the full arbitration panel.
Yeah.
Do you change the proposal when you go to arbitration? Or are you stuck with the final proposal?
No, we're not. Arbitration starts with our last formal proposal before we started mediation.
Oh.
So we revert back to that 60%.
60, 70, 60, 75, 100, 000.
No, it's even before that. We go back to the 60% convert to a stipend. And I forget what COLAs we had with that.
Okay.
Oh, that's great. That'd be a fine place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it isn't. I mean, you want to settle this so you don't have to deal with it every 3 years.
Yeah. But on the other hand, if the rank and file are, well, no, never mind. Okay, anything else on the unit?
No, I'm good with my questions. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
I wish I had a magic key to this.
I do too.
I was gonna say, I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's, I find it one of the most frustrating aspects of the work.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I find it very tedious. I mean, I spent 4 hours on the phone the other day waiting for them to come back with their responses.
Oh.
It frustrates me.
Well, that's part of their game.
Oh, I know.
Mm.
And the arbitrator and the mediator can constrain that.
Right.
Well, as the saying goes, illegitima non carborundum. even though it's not real Latin. I know that.
Yeah. Right. How about carpe diem quod minimum postero credula? Seize the day, put as little faith as possible in tomorrow.
Oh, there we go.
Greg, if you could zip us an update in email on the meal stuff this week, that'd be good.
I'm sorry, Eli, what was that?
If you could get an update to us in email on the Meola case sometime, that'd be good.
Yep.
Okay, I think I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Moved by Becky, seconded by Ann. Roll call vote, Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, good night, folks. We'll see you.
Good
on
night.
All right, good
Thank you.
night. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
all the
Eli.
work, Greg.
Yeah.